Hello and welcome back to Shock's Talks. I'm Shakti and I'm making this channel to discuss recent UFO history and current UFO related news. I'm also digging into the past and continuing my own journey of learning. These episodes are chronological, but you can also skip around if you want to learn about a specific topic within the overall theme of aliens, consciousness, the nature of reality, and UFOs or UAPs. I have descriptions and hashtags and links with every episode. If you're new to all of this, I'd highly recommend watching these from the beginning because I go over a lot of major events that can help you to see the big picture and just have a little more context for whatever's going on in the news today regarding this topic. And there's always more zooming in to do, but this is a nice way to get started on all of this. I've given little descriptions with each episode, like I said. I've also included lots of links that can take you deeper into your own research. I'm reading books, listening to podcasts and interviews, and keeping an eye on various internet channels of communication, as well as just talking to people out in the real world. I'm hoping this channel can serve as onboarding for my friends and other people who are starting to take an interest in UFOs and paranormal or anomalous experiences. And many other wonderful creators are doing the same. So you've got options. UFOs are something that have been talked about and studied throughout history, but in the fringes until recently. Many have disregarded these strange things and labeled them as not worthy of serious study, but all of that is changing today, and this is my effort to help myself understand more, as well as anyone who wants the Cliff's Notes and some speculation. So one day I hope to be the kind of person that can speak about all of this very eloquently, just off the cuff. But right now I'm always reading from my notes because I just want to be concise and I don't want to waste anyone's time. And this is my way of learning the information on a deeper level myself. In today's episode, I'm going over some recent UFO news, the Seoul Conference, David Grusch, and Diana Walsh Pasulka. Then I'm wrapping up this 3-episode focus on what I've been calling the world of thoughts. And that's my name for the psychic space or the ether, and it contains remote viewing and consciousness studies and all of that other psi phenomena that as it pertains to the UFO topic. I'll definitely keep talking about all of that as we go forward, but I just wanted to have this little 3-episode focus for a minute before I get back into abduction and alien races and alien agendas and people's experiences. I think it's a really nice foundation to have this understanding of studies that have occurred around psychic phenomena and it totally relates to the alien experiences. So let's start with the Seoul Conference that happened November 17th through the 18th, 2023, and that was about 10 days ago. It's the 28th right now. The Seoul Foundation is new, and it was started by Gary Nolan and Peter Skafish. There's a link to their site below, and I talked about it in the last episode too. And basically, this is a new think tank for UAP studies, and it's a multidisciplinary and academic look at what the hell is going on. People are very excited about it in the UFO community, and this conference was the first of its kind in a way. There was an emphasis on really credible speakers who are mostly PhDs, and a lot of big names were there attending as well. I found this YouTube channel, The Good Trouble Show with Matt Ford, and he was able to attend the Seoul Conference and interviewed someone else who was there named Nicholas G. Nicholas is a member of AIAA, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. He's a flight test engineer, and his Twitter is linked below along with this interview that I'll be using as my main source for this little recap of the Seoul Conference. And Seoul is S-O-L here. Nicholas called this inaugural conference a very strong interdisciplinary call to action for what is inevitably coming down the road, which is greater public disclosure of the UAP phenomenon from official sources and opening that up to the scientific community and eventually to industry. So basically, people are coming together to coordinate around what some call disclosure and what I call the ongoing evolution of the thinking and secrecy or transparency around UFOs and the intelligence that is behind them. This conference wasn't full of new revelations, according to Nicholas, but rather it added context. He said there were people representing different areas of academia, the industrial base, government, military. He estimated about 300 people in the lecture rooms, and he thinks the numbers will keep growing. He called it the Invisible College. There were congressional staffers, people from the intelligence community, representation from the Department of Defense, and others. The caliber of speakers and guests was high. Different UFO channels on Twitter and YouTube have all been covering this. People were not supposed to record or leak anything from this conference, which is the same as the Contact in the Desert conference that I went to earlier this year, because they release their own recordings and probably just don't want people making money off of it, I imagine. I don't really know. So during this Seoul conference, a person named Deep Prasad leaked a snapshot of a disclosure timeline that some people online compared to Marvel's 10-year plans for the Marvel Universe, which I thought was funny. And basically everyone was all at Twitter about it. Deep was kicked out of the conference after posting this slide to Twitter, and there's a video below under the Lester Nare section that explains it all. So all of this information is coming from Lester Nare. I've also seen other people posting about this leak. And in the video that I linked here, you can look at the slide that was leaked, a photo of a slide, and then people recreated that in high fidelity. So it's broken down into 5 or 6 phases, and various lines of effort include A, public sector government, which includes policy, law, and national security. B, philosophical investigation, the humanities. This includes ethics, anthropology, sociology, and religion. C, scientific research, natural sciences, physics, chemistry, material science, and biology. And then D, private sector, industry and society, intellectual property, industry, economics, and trade. So these are the lines that are going across this plan, and then the vertical columns that are representing the phases in time start with phase 0, which is called shaping. And under that category, you had NIDS, OSAP, ATIP, DoD video release, 2017 New York Times article, that was Leslie Kean or Kane, I've heard people say it both ways, and UAPTF. So all the phase 0 stuff has already occurred. Phase 1, they called demonstrate existence, and that's listed as being on target for January 1st, 2024. And all of this, like I said, is taken directly from this Lester Nare video. So I'm going to have you just watch his video for the rest of it if you're curious about more, because I don't want to just repeat all of his information, but that's kind of what he started with. And it's very interesting. You can see the visuals that he provides in that video. It's short. It's a TikTok video. So back to Nicholas G. in this interview that we were talking about before. He said that Avi Loeb opened his talk at the Seoul conference by asking the question, why is childlike bullying more prevalent than childlike curiosity? And this is pretty interesting because it gets right to the heart of what has made this field of study so convoluted. The stigma, disinformation, and history of intimidation and harassment is a big part of what we're seeing changing today when it comes to all of this, but there's still a long way to go. While the stigma may be shrinking or appearing to shrink, it's hard to say whether or not the transparency will ever actually be possible. And it's highly likely that disinformation is still a huge part of this whole thing. And it's daunting to think about because with the internet and the way information spreads, these intelligence agencies or people protecting private interests could really do a lot of damage, and it wouldn't be hard. I actually started questioning David Grusch recently in my mind because he appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast, and people online have been really into following his every move. And it's interesting to see the way the different witnesses have been operating in the public eye ever since the hearing. So, for example, Graves and Fravor have kept a relatively low profile, and there's been a huge buzz around Grusch. Now, hear me out. And no one I've heard is asking this question, If Grusch is really blowing the whistle on big secret keepers, why is he even still alive? I know it sounds extreme, but really, if people wanted him quiet, it's obvious that they have the power to silence. If he's basically on a talking tour now, and there have been obvious moves to make him seem more relatable, like him talking about his autism, his wife, his PTSD, for example, he was supposed to stay really vigilant about what he can and can't say, and people like Jeremy Corbell have been hinting at the fact that Grusch will be unmuzzled eventually, and now it seems that that is beginning to happen. So it could be totally real and sincere, and it also could be like choreography in time. Like when I zoom out and compare him to the other witnesses in the hearing, it just appears that there's a lot of hype around him in particular, and that makes me suspicious. Not necessarily of him as an individual, but he's someone, well, he works for intelligence. He's someone who interviewed people to gain access to the information he has. So it's possible that even he was set up. And sometimes people consider this possibility. It's a little chaotic to be suspicious of everyone all the time. And my approach is to take things at face value at first and then continue to watch all the activity around it over time. And just to like make sure to zoom out once in a while and ask that question, you know, what does it hurt to ask that question? So it's kind of a wild landscape that we're in, and we don't need to go too far into all of this confusion. But I would love to hear if any of you have ever wondered about any of the people who are in prominent positions in the disclosure movement. Put it in the comments if you want to. Nobody ever comments. Yeah, because, you know, we can't be afraid of looking stupid or being wrong while in the midst of this process of uncovering truth. I like to think through all these different angles myself. So the Grusch interview is linked below, and before we get into the World of Thoughts Part 3, I just also wanted to let you know that Diana Walsh Pasulka is also gaining a lot of followers right now. She wrote American Cosmic a few years ago and is now promoting a new book, Encounters, which people seem really impressed with, and I have a copy and I'm pretty excited to read it myself. She's a religious studies professor and is looking at accounts of interactions with things that resemble UFO sightings today in religious texts from the past. The interview I linked for you is on the YouTube show Your Superior Self, and it's actually a really interesting conversation with her. She was also speaking at the Soul Conference and is, I think, kind of friends with Gary Nolan at this point, has done some stuff with Gary Nolan at least, at the very least. So I'll get into that book soon and I'll be able to talk more about it later on. So our final note on these like news updates is on the Schumer-Rounds amendment, and it was kind of looking like that would probably pass. Now people on Twitter are saying there might be some Republican resistance to the amendment. I think it's coming up fast. I'm not exactly sure what day or when this gets approved or not. But I've just been a little skeptical all along in terms of whether or not this could actually get passed. And if it does, how will it be enforced? So this amendment, I've linked to it in other episodes and talked about it in more detail. So I'm just going to give you my own summary off the top of my head. But it's basically about protecting whistleblowers and getting more information from whoever has it about exotic materials or UAPs, reverse engineering programs. It's about gathering the items and the materials and the government basically being able to get their hands on whatever they want, which always felt pretty unrealistic to me because basically the people who want to get away with things are not really the kind of people who are concerned about the law. So honestly, it feels silly to me that we put our faith in this legislation. Like if the government said, you private companies, these companies that make more money than I can even fathom, and they're like, you guys need to hand over the goods right now, or we're coming to get it. So, like, who's coming to get it, first of all? And how are you even going to find it if they don't want it to be found? And what would stop these people from using money and power to strike deals that would allow them to bypass these laws, just like they do all the time? I just don't think private companies who have a lock on new technology and advanced science and who are making money off of war are the rule following types. You know what I mean? So we'll see about the Schumer Rounds amendment. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Now, if I was an agent of disinformation, I would have a very detailed plan of attack that would unfold over time. First, I would become aware of the UFO community and how they operate. I would be able to tell by online reactions, forums, and comments what people are thinking, what they're into. I'd pay attention to questions asked by conference attendees. I'd follow what people gravitate towards and what they put faith in. I would compile and sift through all of this data. I would identify and plant agents into the stream of activity one by one, and they would be spread out. Each one would speak to different facets of the community at large. I would have to choose people who represent things that actual experiencers could identify with, and I would make them credible in the public eye over time by helping them to publish works, make appearances on the right circuits, etc. Some would have to be academics, some would have to be podcasters, some would have to represent the military side of all of this, and some the very like legitimate and credible academic types, you know? So these people might seem to end up overshadowing and overpowering the others who have been toiling away at this work for years because they have the backing and the team support of an intelligence agency behind them. The power and prominence they gain would allow them to steer the conversation and keep people engaged in whatever they need us to be engaged in. Leaks would be deliberate, and honestly, this type of plan wouldn't even take that long. It could have been unfolding in our reality since around, let's just say, 2010, for example. Why would I have this job of disinformation agent? Why would it matter to do this work? Well, it would be important to protect secrets if what is really going on is so shocking, so outrageous, and so important to all people on Earth that it would absolutely crumble the status quo. What would world governments and private companies be hiding? Well, for example, they could be hiding hidden technologies, hidden advances in science, and maybe even awareness of and alliances with aliens. Who knows? These are things that some people really wonder about, though, and have written books about. In this Richard Dolan video linked below, he talks about the theft in the federal government, money going to mysterious causes or disappearing. It's so wild, but these things are really out of control, so people can see that it's happening, but who can do anything about it? Power structures are such that we do not have big bodies of power who really have our interest at heart. To put it another way, they are for them, not us. This is a systemic issue. On this list of red lines in this video that I linked below, this Richard Dolan video, he's listed out these bullet points: knowledge of extraterrestrial presence, including abductions, possession of exotic technology, secret space programs, illegal criminal secrecy, including corporate financial actors. He says there is likely knowledge of an ongoing alien presence. It's a global phenomenon. We've got satellites everywhere. He says, you can't tell us they're oblivious to this. They know. This is why that NASA thing was so silly. Yeah, go back to the NASA episode. They know where alien bases are on Earth or in the oceans. On Earth, in the Earth oceans. He asks, do they have knowledge of infiltration? And Dolan makes the point that he's not sure this is a thing. Like, he's not saying aliens have infiltrated, but that a responsible conversation and analysis must include this question, which is interesting because sometimes in the more, I would say, mainstream academic circles that are starting to talk a lot about this stuff, they really do shy away from the alien side of it all. As humanity becomes more powerful and more dangerous, why wouldn't other beings want to see what's going on here? They might want to influence our society, maybe for better, maybe not. there are many books that point to human-alien collaboration. So when I'm looking at what I call the new mainstream of UFO information online and in books, it's kind of like the latest wave in my mind. I'm excited to consume all the content because I want to know as much as I can, and looking at this stuff means definitely looking at some disinformation, no doubt. And I always remain skeptical of all of it, and especially the stuff that has the air of, well, we know some things, but we don't know a lot, or we're just starting to find out this, that, or the other. These kinds of attitudes are absolutely ridiculous when you look at the whole picture of what has been going on and what has been written about and said over the last 80 years. So if someone is acting that way, like at a high level, like, oh, well, we don't really know much, but we're going to find out, like, I'm definitely suspicious. It's just ridiculous. So all of this chatter online is like the surface of the ocean in my mind. It's all these choppy waves that toss us around, and it really does feel like this push and pull. You know, you're thinking it's this, and then you're over here thinking it's that, and sometimes it's really exhausting, and maybe that's by design. But beneath all of that is a vast expanse of information and resources. So let's dive down into something that is not a part of the surface conversation in a big way right now: remote viewing and the world of thoughts, part 3. In part 1, I talked about the book Thought Power by Swami Shivananda. That's in episode 15. Basically, I'm just bringing a yogic perspective into the conversation because in the yogic traditions, there are descriptions of reality that are very similar to current scientific models, like simulation theories and other consciousness models. In episode 16, I talk about remote viewing again, and that's the World of Thoughts Part 2. We touch on Russell Targ, and today we're going to talk about Ingo Swann. So who is Ingo Swann? He has a really cool name. Ingo is a famous natural psychic who coined the term remote viewing and helped shape protocols for others to develop ESP, or extrasensory perception. Here's a little bit from his website, which is linked below. In terms of the phenomena, what is today called remote viewing has existed for eons, weaving in and out of humanity's history under the guise of many names. Believing all things psi are species-wide abilities, including what he and Dr. Janet Lee Mitchell labeled remote viewing to be part and parcel of the human experience. Ingo pioneered the development of a remote viewing training technique using geographical coordinates with its requisite protocols called CRV, first labeled coordinate remote viewing, then later controlled remote viewing. Ingo's technique. Ingo used this technique to train intelligence operatives with no known natural psychic ability to remote view. That is, to assess operational targets, ones that could not be seen using conventional means. Ingo's training consisted of progressing through stages. While working for various clandestine agencies, Ingo identified 6 such stages. However, later in life, Ingo worked on and identified additional stages. More on this can be found in his archives at the University of West Georgia. So Ingo's Beginner's Guide to Remote Viewing is this book, Everybody's Guide to Natural ESP. Oh, there you go. And I've said this before, probably recently when talking about Russell Targ, but I think it's important to say it again. Tom Campbell has a theory of everything that is a model for reality based on the premise that consciousness is the computer of a simulation like reality, and individual units of consciousness have free will to make choices within it. In his model, all psi abilities are explained and accounted for, along with all paranormal happenings, and remote viewing, or accessing the Akashic records, or speaking to non-physical entities, telepathy, debugging code using your mind, or even distant healing are all possible. And these are all conclusions that many famous remote viewers have come to as well. What I find really relevant to this discussion is Tom's take on protocols in general. Of course, they are useful, and many people have many different protocols when it comes to all of these psychic abilities, but the thing behind the protocol is the intent. And the thing that could stand in the way of the intent is actually a whole slew of factors. So let me try to explain what I mean further by first going into this quote from this book, Everybody's Guide to Natural ESP. And this is Ingo Swann. There is another important phenomenon that I think should be brought out as you get ready to do your own experiments. One of the mysteries among so many that parapsychologists have never been able to resolve but have frequently observed is the sudden cessation of ESP in an individual who had a recent string of hits. After a certain success rate has been reached, suddenly the whole ESP system seems to collapse, and the person goes through a period in which he cannot call the target at all, as if something in the ESP system were avoiding it altogether. In parapsychology, this is called psi missing, and it has dragged many elegantly designed experiments into oblivion. I've experienced this myself. It is associated with a certain inner fatigue and collapse of the psychic pathway, analogous to computer overload. That's still Ingo talking. There's a little bit more. Now this is, computer overload. Yeah, that's the end of the Ingo section. So this is all interesting to me because through the Tom Campbell lens, we could assume that Ingo was accessing data from the database in his remote viewing. And either the larger consciousness system itself was blocking or skewing the data for some reason. Maybe the intent was weak due to exhaustion, or it's even possible that other intelligences could have been interfering using their powerful intentions. So I guess what I'm saying there is like Ingo thought he was a part of an experiment. There could have been another secret experiment going on behind the experiment. It's always possible. So basically, I find a lot of the remote viewing protocols that are outlined in these books that kind of came out of these remote viewers from the 70s and on a little bit clunky. I mean, these guys, most of them are men that I've heard of. They were very successful. They trained a lot of people. They obviously got a lot done, but they were pretty strict with these protocols. And if you study like other people who looked into out of body or remote viewing and kind of approached it from other angles, you kind of start to realize that like all kinds of people have their different ways of doing these things, and it's not like it has to be one way. So I think these are good foundations, but I think it's good to keep in mind that there are many different ways that people can remote view or access data from the database, the Akashic record, have an out-of-body experience, or even other ways of basically getting information that is non-local and being able to interpret it accurately. So just like in healing communities where one person prays, another may lay hands on, someone else uses Reiki or distant Reiki, somebody else uses crystals, etc. Through the Tom Campbell lens, all of these practices have one common element, and that is intention. It's the intention behind the protocol. So it's not to say that these practices and protocols are not important or even sacred to some, because they can be really effective and they gain power over time through many people adding energy and belief to them and kind of amplifying the intent. But it's always good to remember that someone else could have a totally different way that yields a better result. One of the things Tom has talked about is substances, for example, and you'll hear all kinds of different takes on how substances can interfere with your psychic abilities. For Tom, sugar is a powerful substance in his system that he avoids because he says it clouds his mind. Whereas his mentor, Bob Monroe, would eat cookies and smoke cigarettes and was still completely effective in his out-of-body travels. In yogic traditions, which we've touched on before a little bit, some people advise abstinence from substances, and yet I have come across some little pieces of information. I think it was in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and definitely heard of it through other people, that hint at beneficial relationships to plants or herbs as a path to unlocking these higher abilities. Of course, these things do come with their own consequences, like so does everything in life. So it really comes down to the individual, and what allows someone to access their own psychic capacity just could be totally different from the next person. In the Diana Walsh Pasulka interview below, I remember her saying something about a man who claimed that hydration is a really important aspect to accessing higher realms or higher levels of consciousness. And he even goes for like a pH balanced water or something along those lines. And again, I think this could be absolutely true for one person. I don't think it means we need to all go out and start drinking only pH balanced water. And I've always had a problem with things like this because it's not sustainable. It doesn't make sense. Not everyone can be so fussy. We don't all have access to all these things. So I don't know, just deep in my gut, I've always felt that like there just has to be so many different ways to the same truth and the same ability. And I think a lot of times when something does work for someone, and maybe it's even proven through some experimentation, people kind of feel like that's the end. Now we know, got to drink pH water. Quick, sell everybody pH water. Make sure we're all drinking it all the time, or whatever, you know. This is just like a human type of mistake we make all the time. So below the Ingo Swann section in the links, I'm adding another link to this little story that I'm going to tell you, but it's a Richard Dolan story. He tells it based on a time when he actually hung out with Ingo Swann and heard the story straight out of the horse's mouth. But it's also written about in Ingo's book, Penetration. So this is kind of about Ingo's life and like some of the stuff he was getting paid to do. And apparently he was having a grand old time. He was working for all these different people, getting side gigs and working for the government and doing experiments and working with other remote viewers. And he was an artist and just having a pretty good time. And at one point in his career of working for these various intelligence agencies as a psychic spy, Ingo was contacted by a man who went by the name Axelrod. And it was all very eerie and strange, and there were these twins involved that kind of sound like these security or Men in Black type guys. And they kind of go and get Ingo, and Ingo starts talking to this guy. He takes him to a secret location. It's a secure underground facility, and he gets paid to do some remote viewing jobs. He remote views the moon, among other things. And at some point, Axelrod takes Ingo to a place by helicopter. He thinks it might have been Alaska. He's not sure. And they land on this helicopter pad, and then they venture out deep into the woods. And according to Ingo, a purplish mist appeared over a lake and then formed into a perfect triangular craft. And then it's like blasting trees and whatever woodland creatures are out there with like light beams or lasers. And the twins who are there with Axelrod and Ingo, they say something like, shit, they know we're here. And they grab Ingo and they start running back to the helicopter. And the last thing Ingo saw when he looked back was the craft was sucking water out of the lake. And he said it was like a reverse waterfall. And Richard Dolan includes this detail that like Ingo was not in good shape because he was a chain smoking artist and he fell and banged up his knee on the way back to the helicopter. And then Axelrod, in all seriousness, asks Ingo, so what was your psychic impression of the craft? And Ingo was just basically like, are you out of your fucking mind? He said, like, I practically pissed my pants. And he was so scared. And then he kind of like calmed down and was able to access a little bit more and kind of said, okay, like if I had to give a take on it, it really felt more like a routine visit along the lines of like someone going to the supermarket. Like this craft was just coming down to like get some water and go. So that is an interesting story, and it kind of gives you a little taste of like Ingo's life and the kind of stuff he was into. And this is kind of a big, famous, weird thing that he got involved with at one point. And Axelrod was like someone whose identity you couldn't really verify, and nobody really knew of him. And so there was a lot of mystery around these people that Ingo met with. And many people have theorized about who they might have been and what they were like into or relate, like what they were affiliated with. And Richard Dolan says that, you know, given the fact that all non-human extraterrestrials do seem to operate with telepathy based on all the reports, they might need intel on how good the best human psychics really are. So Dolan makes the point that there are many reports of aliens who look just like humans, but are intensely telepathic. Not like you and me, but different, but they look the same. And he thinks that that's the best theory as to who Axelrod might have been. And that really does strike a chord with me. Not necessarily about Axelrod, but just the idea that like there are human looking beings here who are different. Where are they from? What makes them different? Not really sure, but that is something that I feel is real. I'll just say that for now. So Ingo was quite a character. He died in 2013. This is just the very surface level of who he was and what he did. But the main thing to know is that he's basically the father of remote viewing. He was an artist, the author of many books, and a natural psychic. So now that he's on your radar, you'll probably hear about him again. And that's it for today. We bounced around a lot, but this is what I've got. I really hope you enjoyed it. I don't claim to know everything or anything really, but this is the stuff I like to think about. And I'm doing the best I can to research and explore it all through this format with you. And I will always learn more and get better over time. So thanks again for taking the time to check out Shock's Talks, and thank you so much to everyone that has subscribed. It's awesome. And I'll see you next time, where we will move away from the world of thoughts for a little bit, and we'll get back into the word no one wants to say in these fancy PhD filled rooms. And that word is aliens.